Well, hey, welcome back. We are glad that you're tuning into this. I don't know what to call this. A podcast, right? We don't have a name for this yet. So I guess if you're watching it and you've got a great idea, leave a comment. Send it in. Let us know somehow. We would love to do it. And I don't know. Maybe we'll put you in the credits, right? If you if you do that. But one of the things that we want to do with this is we just want to each week kind of recap what was preached on, but not just give like a summary. Actually go into a little more detail and look at some things maybe in a different light or in a deeper way. So this Sunday we started looking at this idea of the classics, right? And we started looking at some Old Testament stories that are maybe, if you grew up in Sunday school, going to church, you heard them. If you didn't, they might not be as familiar. You grew up in Sunday school, mm-hmm. right? But it's probably safe to say that sometimes the way we teach stories in Sunday school, not that we're misleading kids, but there might just be some parts we leave out, right?
Like omitting that David cut Goliath's head off.
Right.
It's not something I would have heard in Sunday school.
Yeah, I don't remember in the children's book reading the part about David like carrying his head around.
Yeah.
That part was conveniently left out. So that's where we've been going with that. One of the reasons I think why this was such a big deal to me, going to this series is, Luke, you and I have had some discussions recently with some groups of people and some people who maybe didn't grow up in church, didn't grow up going to Sunday school. And one of the things that they mentioned was like, hey, some of those stories, even when we told them and it didn't have, David's head getting cut off, they hadn't really heard those, or they weren't as familiar with those. And so we were kind of thinking with this series, going through some of those classic stories.
Yeah, and I think also, for those that didn't, or are new to church or something like that, like we want to, these stories that they've been seeing in media for a long time, movies or whatever, that we can kind of give you the root of where those actually came from, and the spin of who they're actually about, and how they can impact us.
Yeah, well, and it was amazing. Like I was thinking about David and Goliath, and just preaching through it this Sunday. And as I was sitting down thinking about it, I was thinking about all the places where like that theme shows up again and again. The little guy that goes up against the big guy, and nobody expects him to win, yet he's the one that wins. Why do you think it's so? Why do you think story connects with people so much?
I think because we kind of feel ourselves in the story. There's a study that's been kind of progressive throughout the years, progress throughout the years, and 2021 I think was when it really came to light. This idea of neural coupling. I'm not a neurologist, so I could be completely wrong. If you are, you can correct me. It's okay. I won't have my feelings hurt. But anyways, it's this idea that when you tell a story, especially if it's one you've actually experienced and you're like retelling that experience, in story form, your brainwaves or my brainwaves will fire neurons that will match your brainwaves and kind of put me in the feeling that I'm in the story as well. Which might be why we read stories like David and Goliath and read ourselves into them, because that's just what our brain naturally wants to do. Which also could be why Jesus often taught in parables instead of just standing up and giving a whiteboard lesson, checklist, whatever, because he's God. He knew that, this will help with their brains and they'll connect with me and they'll take it home better and yeah, that kind of thing. So.
Yeah, and it's amazing. You mentioned about like reading Bible stories, because I think that's fascinating how our brains work like that. But even if you're telling me a story where you're not the main character, but it's just like the story of David and Goliath or whatever, like that still happens. It's something about that narrative that kind of pulls me in, and from the ways that our brain works to it connects with us at a level that information and facts alone don't. It was fascinating to me this Sunday preaching, because I had a number of people come up to me afterwards and just say different things about story and storytelling and all these sorts of things. And this Sunday, I would say I probably focused on the act of storytelling through my sermon more than I have definitely this summer. I think the part of it was just the subject matter lent itself to that. But it was a good reminder for me, and I guess a caution for me as one who gets up and talks a lot, is, it's super easy for us to get into this routine where it's just like, okay, just get people information, just teach them the Bible, teach them the facts, do this, right? Do that. We boil it down to a formula. And I have to remember that some of the best preaching that I could do, or some of the best preaching that I've heard that has impacted me the most has been because someone has told me a story, whether it's their story or the story of the Bible, right?
Yeah, I think there's something there too of even the connection with somebody else in the story of Jesus, and the power of testimony, and how we can invite. We actually talked about this last night at a small group. You can invite someone or encourage someone into a life with Jesus based on your own story of Christ's impact on your life, and we call that testimony. And one of our students last night was like, yeah, this was like my experience growing up, and I'm not going to get into specifics, but because of their experience, they now can use that experience to see others through that experience, because they're doing the same exact thing. And it's like this: God knew what he was doing when he created storytelling, and he knew what he was doing when he formed our brains to interact with each other, and to, even as something as simple as testimony, to lead others to him. And yeah, it's just, I get more encouraged by who he is every single day. So
well, and I think that ought to be encouraging to us, and I think it ought to take the pressure off of us when we you can call it whatever you want, being a witness, engaging in evangelism, sharing your testimony, doing all these sorts of things. Like, you don't have to be a Bible scholar. Tell people your story, and tell people the story that's the ultimate story, the story that made the most difference in human history, right? And so that's kind of what we were trying to do. I was trying to do on Sunday is, hey, let's look at the story of David and Goliath, and let's look at this, and how do we see Jesus in this story? I think, I can't remember who it was. It's some guy who, a preacher a long time ago, has since passed, but he said that every time he preaches, he tries to make a beeline to Jesus. He tries to move to Jesus as soon as he can, because he is the hero of the story. He is the one who is the most important. If somebody hears something about my faith, that's great. But ultimately they need to hear about Jesus and who he is. And so that's what I tried to do on Sunday, right? And talk about, I one of the lines that I used a number of times was that Jesus is the greater David, right? So like in the story, we see Jesus again and again. And I think one of the things that people sometimes are like, wait, hold on a second, like what do you mean? Like, does that mean that Israel was sitting there and they were hearing this story prior to Jesus coming, and they should have thought like, oh, Jesus, yes. Well, no, that's not what I'm saying. But Jesus himself says that all of Scripture points to me, testifies to me. And so when we read these stories, especially in the position that we're now, we see how God was leading to. He was showing who Jesus is, who the Messiah is, right? That there is someone who is to come greater. And if we read on in the story, we see how someone is promised to come in the line of David, and David will rule on the throne, and all these sorts of things. And it's like you get to Jesus, and you read the story, and it's like light bulbs go off, and you're like, oh man, I get that, right? There's this branch of I don't know what you'd call it, biblical interpretation or biblical study, typology, where basically like one thing, like a person or a symbol or an item or whatever in the Old Testament is representative of something else, and is representative specifically of Jesus in this case, right? So that's where we would get things saying like, Jesus is the greater David, Jesus is the greater Moses, Jesus is the greater, and so on and so forth.
So you would call that typology. The word I would use or have used is recapitulation, which is a big one. So.
It is a big one. So for those of us, like people like me, right, who didn't go to Ozark Christian College and Lincoln Seminary, right? We gotta shout them out.
Thanks,
here.
Ozark.
What would you say? How would you define that for people?
I mean, simply put, the prefix "re" means again, and so it's retelling something in a different form that reflects something that came before. And so on Sunday you said something about Jesus is like the new Adam, like Adam who came and failed, like we have also failed. Christ came along and didn't fail, so he's like the recapitulation of Adam. Or in this case, David fighting Goliath, Christ comes and fights death itself and the enemy and defeats it. He is the recapitulation of David. But the word typology might work better. So.
Yeah, well, I mean, either one works, right? Both of them are words that we don't really use a whole lot. But the idea of recapitulation, like you see that just in general as like a storytelling feature. Like I think about in Revelation, you read in one chapter, a little bit into the book, that the world ends, and then a little while later you read that the world ends, and then again you read that the world ends. Well, the world didn't end 3 times.
Sounds like it did.
It sounds like it did, right? And some would take maybe that's something. Maybe we need to explore Revelation on this. No S on the end, by the way. No, it's not Revelations. It's just one revelation. But some might say, right, that like, oh yeah, like that's a literal. And I think that's where you and I have similar views on the book of Revelation, where it's like, no, actually what's happening is like the story's being told, and then in the narrative it goes back and tells the story again, and then it goes back and tells the story again. So you see that show up all throughout Scripture, that idea of recapitulation, right?
You kind of see it in I mean, just thinking out loud now, the story of Israel and their constant cycle of messing up, and they get all the way, they've been doing it for a couple hundred to a couple thousand years, and they get to Roman times, and they've still just like cycled through that. And Christ comes along and he's like, here's how we're going to reset this and never have to do it again. And he does, and it's just great.
Yeah
It's inspiring.
I think one of the interesting things about preaching, and this, is that like you spend time studying throughout the week, and you'll find these things that you're like, oh, this is just so cool, that then if you're trying to go for like half an hour on a Sunday and you're trying to just hit the high notes, you're kind of gonna you're gonna leave things out, right? Because there's certain things that like I think like, man, that's the coolest thing ever, and I might tell that to somebody and it's like blank stares, and it's like, or what are you talking about? Or like they weren't there with me studying, so they might not share my enthusiasm. But it's just interesting talking about this whole like typology, recapitulation, kind of all these different things that point to Jesus. It's just interesting as I was looking through just all the little details in the story of David and Goliath. Genesis 3:15, talks about the serpent's head being crushed, right? Goliath is hitting the head with a stone. The word for bronze and the word for serpent are closely related. They share, I believe, a similar root. But there's a little bit of a word play, and you have in the wilderness when Moses raises up the bronze serpent. There's a little bit in the Hebrew. There's a little bit of a word play there. So then when you see bronze, Goliath had a bronze helmet, right? This word play here, he's hitting the head. Just those little details. There's one really interesting one. You and I have talked about this, about Golgotha, right? Mm-hmm. Which means the place of the skull, and it's interesting to me. I think you were actually the one that kind of you said it was a Professor Ozark that.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure one of my professors. I'm not sure which one exactly. So if you watch this, tell me and I'll give you credit later. But the idea was that Golgotha, the place of the skull, like
being, and sorry to interrupt, but just if you're watching this, you're like, Golgotha, what are you talking about?
Where Christ was crucified. Yeah, the could be the same place, the same valley, or in proximity to the same valley that Goliath and David fought, where David, using the sword of his enemy to kill his enemy, defeat his enemy, where at Golgotha, Christ used death, the sword of the enemy, to defeat the enemy, who is Satan. And anyway, it's just a kind of a fun little, like, oh, that's a parallel that might be closer to truth than we actually.
It's like a little nugget, right? And it's like I wouldn't base any like huge theology on it.
Yeah.
And if it's one of those things where like it might not be a link, it might be like, oh, you're kind of stretching there. But it is interesting to think. So then you think like when people Jews see this event happening, or after Jesus' death and resurrection, they hear of this story and they hear of Golgotha, the place of the skull, right? They think of the story of David Goliath. I mean, I've even heard it said, and again, it's one of these like, oh, that sounds really cool, and that'll preach. And like, would I say 100% that like, oh yeah, that actually is? I don't know. But one scholar suggested that like Golgotha is actually like it's Goliath of Gath. Right? And so it's like a close. It sounds close enough. It's meant to sound close enough. I don't know. I'm not building any like giant theology on it, but I think there's
theology.
I did that not on purpose at all. That was good though. That was good. Maybe that's what we should call this podcast: giant theology. Slay your giants theology.
I don't like it, but
no,
we can workshop it.
We won't go with that.
I think that the Golgotha thing, I again points to, the typology that you were talking about earlier, and I don't, like you said, I don't know that you'd build theology off of it, but it is another reminder that the author of Scripture is God himself, working through all of these human authors, putting in themes and narratives and stories and details that, though Moses maybe didn't know what he was writing when he wrote Exodus or Samuel or whoever, Matthew, whoever's writing, though they maybe didn't know the impact of what they're writing, as God over time pieced it all together, and you're, like you said, you're a Jewish student and you're learning about this Jesus character, or you're like, oh, he was crucified at Golgotha, and oh my gosh, that's where David killed Goliath, and these like narratives start to piece together, and just this idea that we have a God who knows that the devil's in the details, right? Like he's not, because Christ conquered him too, but you know what I'm saying? Like it's intentional, and we see it, and even something like I preached a couple weeks ago about where Christ was baptized. And it could be the same exact place that Joshua led the Israelites across on dry land, over the Jordan River, or across the Jordan River. And it's like, maybe it's not that big of a detail, but if this is your ancestry, which it is ours, we're invited into that, it's kind of inspiring to hear these typology recasts that have just keep occurring, and that Jesus just points to greater things.
Yeah. I don't think any of those are a mistake, for sure. So put your pushback hat on, right? What are you pushing back on my sermon on Sunday, right? Something you heard me say, or maybe an application or anything like that?
Well, you strongly, boldly declared that I am not David. And though I know that I'm not David, and we've been talking about typology and recapitulation, and that Jesus is the greater David, but I wrestle through big things, and sometimes it's nice to think that I have this model in Scripture of God being with David and him able to slay a lion and a bear and eventually Goliath. Like you had said that, well, I'm not David. But
yeah, and
I feel like I am?
I think I actually said like I'm probably more akin. You're probably more akin to like Israel, kind of hiding behind Saul, right? Who's terrified himself, right? Who's also this man who, like, I didn't even think about it beforehand, but this man who is like the scriptures say he's head and shoulders above everyone else, right? So like he's not a small.
He's probably as tall as
guy.
Me, you know. Just
yeah.
Average height was about 5'11", and I'm 6'4", so you know, height, shoulders. It's how maybe Israel felt like I feel when I look at you. Yeah. Maybe they're like, oh my goodness, he's so tall. But anyway, and still watching from afar and trying to get someone else to step up and fight for you.
Right. Yeah. And so I realize that was probably a rather bold claim that I made. And you know, there's probably, as always, there's always stuff you can unpack there.
Yeah. So our sermon. Unpacking. That's what we can call our sermon or our podcast.
Unpacking. I don't know, bad one. Man. Yeah, we're gonna come up with something.
Please help us.
Please do. So I think that we can be inspired by these stories. We can be encouraged in our faith by these stories. I think what I was trying to caution people against is reading ourselves into the story when that's not the point of the story. So I think we have this tendency, right? Whether it's the story of David and Goliath, whether it's the story of the Good Samaritan, right? In the New Testament, we tend to put ourselves in the hero position. The whole point I mentioned, like the story of the Good Samaritan. The whole point of that is there is no such thing as a good Samaritan, at least in their eyes, right? So the point is not, hey, you're the hero and you need to go be a good Samaritan. The point is, this whole thing is upside down and so absurd. When it comes to David and Goliath, can you be inspired by the story that yes, God will be with you, and you don't have to fight your battles. God fights them for you, and all these sorts of things. Yes, of course, 100%. You can be. That's totally acceptable. That's fine. Be inspired by the little guy beating up on the big bad bully. But just understand, you're not the hero of this story. And you need someone else to fight that ultimate battle for you.
And just to ask the question, who is the hero of the story? I'm asking you.
You're asking me.
I'm asking you. Like, just to restate it, who is the hero of the story?
Jesus.
Yeah,
Jesus is the hero, right? Yeah. And I think if we lose that, we lose the plot.
And this just becomes another cool story that we get to read to our kids, or a good movie we get to go watch with friends. But outside of the theater or the book, it doesn't have any implications for us. So yeah, I think that's someone that we cannot lose, and that is that Jesus is the ultimate hero of this story and of all of the stories in Scripture and of our story. And
yeah, cool. Well, this Sunday we're looking at another classic, looking at Moses and the burning bush. This bush that was burning in the desert, and it wasn't. It was burning on fire, but it wasn't burning up, right? And so,
you're gonna preach barefoot?
I might actually preach barefoot, right?
It might help with the.
I'll be sure.
Neuron firing.
Maybe I will. That sounds like a good idea. You may have inspired me. So, anyway, thanks for watching. Thanks for tuning in. Hope that this was helpful and encouraging to you. And like we said at the beginning, if you got a great name, we'd love for you to comment and let us know. Also, if you find this encouraging, share it with somebody else that it can encourage as well.